Before we begin today's story, let us know in the comment section what time and part of the world you are listening from. Also, if you enjoy today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Valerie Davis stood outside her new office building, taking in the impressive glass facade that stretched toward the sky. At 27, she had already made significant strides in her career at Tech Forward Solutions, and this transfer to their flagship branch in Boston represented another step up the corporate ladder. The promotion came with a considerable salary bump and the promise of greater responsibilities, but more importantly, it offered Valerie the chance to prove herself in a more challenging environment. Her reflection in the building's glass exterior showed a confident young woman with flawless brown skin, carefully styled natural hair, and a tailored navy blue pantsuit that spoke of both professionalism and style. Yet beneath that composed exterior, Valerie's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was her fresh start, her big break, and she was determined to make it count. The first few days at her new position started promisingly enough. Her new team seemed welcoming, and her superior, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, was impressed with her initial presentations. However, the dream job quickly developed a significant thorn in its side: the commute from her Aunt Martha's house in the suburbs. Aunt Martha, a night shift nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, had generously offered Valerie a temporary place to stay while she settled into the city. While the arrangement saved her immediate housing costs, the 2-hour commute each way was proving to be more challenging than Valerie had anticipated. "Valerie, this is the third time this week you've been late." Mrs. Patricia's stern voice cut through the morning air as Valerie rushed into the office, slightly disheveled from running from the train station. "I understand you're new to the city, but punctuality is non-negotiable in our department." "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Patricia," Valerie apologized, trying to catch her breath. The train was delayed again, and then the connecting bus. "I don't need the details," Mrs. Patricia interrupted, holding up her hand. "What I need is for you to find a solution. Your work is excellent, Valerie, but these tardiness issues are becoming a problem. I suggest you prioritize finding an apartment closer to the office." That evening, Valerie collapsed onto her bed at Aunt Martha's house, exhaustion seeping into her bones. The day's work wasn't just the challenge anymore. It was the marathon of getting there and back that was wearing her down. Her aunt found her still lying there when she came to check on her before leaving for her night shift. "Rough day, sweetheart?" Aunt Martha asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Valerie sat up, running her hands over her face. "The commute is killing me, Aunt Martha. Mrs. Patricia basically told me today that I need to find my own place closer to work." "Well, she's not wrong," her aunt replied, patting her knee. "This arrangement was always meant to be temporary. Maybe it's time to start looking seriously for your own place." The next morning, Valerie requested a meeting with Mrs. Patricia. Walking into the office, she took a deep breath and laid out her plan. "Mrs. Patricia, I want to request 2 weeks off to focus on finding an apartment closer to the office. I've already started researching areas and contacting real estate agents." Mrs. Patricia studied her for a moment before nodding. 2 weeks, starting Monday. Use them wisely, Valerie. I'm giving you this time because I believe in your potential, but I need you to solve this situation." With her time off approved, Valerie threw herself into apartment hunting. She contacted multiple real estate agents, created spreadsheets of potential neighborhoods, and set up numerous viewings. However, finding the perfect place proved more challenging than she'd anticipated. Some apartments were still too far from work. Others were in noisy neighborhoods that would make working from home impossible on flex days, and many were either run down or way above her budget. As the first week of her house hunting leave drew to a close with no success, Valerie found herself at the local grocery store one Saturday morning, running an errand for her aunt. The store was relatively quiet, with just a few weekend shoppers pushing their carts through the aisles. She was reaching for the last bottle of her aunt's favorite organic honey on the top shelf, stretching as far as she could, when she noticed a tall figure approaching with a shopping cart. Perfect timing, she thought, about to ask for help. But before she could open her mouth, the stranger, a remarkably handsome man with striking gray eyes, reached up and grabbed the very bottle she'd been trying to get. Without so much as a glance in her direction, he dropped it into his cart and continued down the aisle. "Excuse me," Valerie called out, her voice sharp with indignation. "I was trying to reach that bottle." The man turned around, and Valerie found herself momentarily startled by just how attractive he was. Tall, well-dressed in casual weekend wear that looked expensive, with a strong jaw and those unusual gray eyes. But his good looks did nothing to diminish her annoyance, especially when his response came with a smirk. "Life isn't fair," he said with a slight shrug before turning back to his shopping. Valerie stood there, mouth agape, watching him walk away. The casual dismissal, the complete lack of common courtesy, it was infuriating. She wanted to follow him and demand he hand over the honey, but her pride wouldn't let her chase after such a rude person. Instead, she grabbed a different brand, all while muttering under her breath about entitled jerks who probably had never heard the word no in their lives. What Valerie didn't know was that the man, Steve Holloway, a 31-year-old portfolio manager, was dealing with his own housing crisis. Having recently relocated to Boston to work remotely for his New York-based investment firm, he was temporarily staying with his college friend Matthew, whose apartment was proving to be a nightmare for professional video calls and focused work. Steve had spent the past few weeks working with various real estate agents, including his friend Mike, searching for the perfect apartment that would serve as both home and remote office. Like Valerie, he had specific requirements: a quiet location, good natural light for video calls, and enough space to set up a proper home office. But finding the right place was proving to be more challenging than expected. Neither Valerie nor Steve could have guessed that their paths would soon cross again, or that their grocery store encounter was just the beginning of a much more complicated story. As they both continued their separate searches for the perfect apartment, fate, with a little help from their mutual real estate agent Mike, was about to throw them together in the most unexpected way. The following week, Mike contacted both of them separately about a stunning apartment he'd found. It was a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern amenities, and a location that seemed too good to be true. For Valerie, it was walking distance to her office. For Steve, it offered the perfect quiet environment for his work-from-home setup. However, when Mike approached the owner, Mrs. Margaret Walter, he hit an unexpected snag. Mrs. Margaret, burned by previous experiences with single tenants, had instituted a strict no singles policy. She was only interested in renting to married couples, believing they would be more stable and responsible tenants. This revelation would set the stage for an arrangement that would change both Valerie's and Steve's lives in ways neither could have imagined. Their mutual need for housing, combined with their strong first impressions of each other, albeit negative ones, was about to pull them into a complicated charade that would test their patience, challenge their prejudices, and ultimately lead them down an unexpected path. Mike sat in his modern downtown office, drumming his fingers against his desk as he contemplated the predicament before him. As a real estate agent who prided himself on finding perfect matches between properties and clients, he rarely found himself in such a complicated situation. The apartment at 342 Beacon Street was exactly what both his clients needed, but Mrs. Margaret's strict no singles policy threatened to derail everything. That's when an unconventional idea began to take shape in his mind. He picked up his phone and called Steve first, his longtime friend from college days. "Steve, I think I have a solution to our problem, but hear me out before you shoot it down." "I'm listening," Steve replied, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "What if you weren't single?" Mike proposed carefully. "What are you suggesting? That I get married in the next 48 hours? Steve's laugh was tinged with sarcasm. "Well, sort of," Mike continued. I have another client who's also perfect for this apartment. What if you two pretended to be married, just for the lease?" The line went silent for a moment before Steve spoke again. "Have you lost your mind?" "Think about it," Mike pressed. "The apartment is exactly what you're looking for. The rent would be split between two people, making it more affordable. You'd both have your own space. The place is huge. It's a win-win situation. You're suggesting I pretend to be married to a complete stranger? Live with someone I don't know? She's a professional, works in tech. I can vouch for her character. Look, just meet her first. What do you have to lose?" After much convincing and detailed planning, Steve reluctantly agreed, though he had a list of conditions about maintaining his privacy and personal space. Mike's next call was to Valerie, who was even more hesitant about the idea. "This sounds illegal," she said immediately. "It's not illegal," Mike assured her. "People do this all the time in expensive cities. Think of it as a creative housing solution." "A creative housing solution that involves lying?" "Think of it as acting," Mike suggested. "Look, Valerie, you have 1 day left of your time off. This apartment is perfect for you. 10 or 15 minutes walk to your office. Great neighborhood, beautiful space. And the guy I'm suggesting this arrangement with? He's a portfolio manager. Works from home mostly. Very professional. I've known him for years." Valerie sat on her bed, feeling the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. The thought of returning to her 2-hour commute made her stomach churn. "Can I at least meet him first?" "Of course," Mike agreed quickly. "We need to take some photos anyway, you know, to make it look convincing for Mrs. Margaret. I know a photographer who can help us create a believable story." The next morning, Valerie arrived at a photography studio in downtown Boston. Her stomach was in knots as she walked through the door, but nothing could have prepared her for the shock of seeing who was standing there, engaged in conversation with Mike. "You!" she exclaimed, recognizing the gray-eyed man from the grocery store. Steve's expression shifted from casual to surprised to slightly amused. "The honey lady." Mike looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "You two know each other?" "We've met," Valerie said coldly, turning to Mike. "This is your trusted friend? The one you're vouching for? He's the most arrogant, inconsiderate, and she's the most entitled." Steve began simultaneously. "Okay, stop," Mike interrupted, holding up his hands. "Whatever happened between you two, can we set it aside for a moment? This arrangement could benefit both of you. The apartment is perfect for both your needs, and the rent split would make it affordable. You don't have to be best friends. You just need to convince Mrs. Margaret you're a happily married couple." The photographer, a cheerful woman named Sarah, began setting up her equipment while Mike tried to mediate between his two clients. After much discussion, both Valerie and Steve agreed to proceed, though neither was happy about it. "Just think of it as a business arrangement," Mike suggested. "You both need this apartment, and you both can help each other get it." The photo shoot was awkward at first. Sarah tried to pose them naturally, but their initial attempts at looking like a loving couple were stiff and unconvincing. "Okay, let's try something different," Sarah suggested. "Steve, stand behind Valerie and put your arms around her waist. Valerie, lean back against him slightly. Now, both of you, think about something that makes you happy." Despite their reluctance, they followed her instructions. As Steve's arms encircled Valerie's waist, she couldn't help but notice how solid and warm he felt against her back. For his part, Steve was surprised by how perfectly she seemed to fit against him and how pleasant her subtle perfume was. The resulting photos were surprisingly convincing. They took several shots. A staged wedding photo where they both managed genuine-looking smiles, a few candid shots of them looking at each other lovingly, and even a fake honeymoon picture on a green screen that Sarah would later edit to look like it was taken in Paris. The meeting with Mrs. Margaret was scheduled for the next day. They met in her elegant sitting room, surrounded by photos of her late husband and their life together. Mrs. Margaret, a striking woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and keen eyes, studied them carefully as they sat holding hands on her antique sofa. "Tell me how you met," she requested, her voice warm but her eyes scrutinizing. Valerie and Steve had rehearsed their story, but in that moment, Valerie decided to inject some truth into their tale. "Actually, we first met at a grocery store," she began, squeezing Steve's hand slightly. "He reached for something I wanted, and I thought he was the most infuriating man I'd ever met." Steve picked up the thread, playing along. "But I couldn't get her out of my mind. Her fire, her determination. I knew I had to see her again." Mrs. Margaret's face softened as she watched them. Something about their dynamic reminded her of her own love story with her late husband. "Love often begins in the most unexpected ways," she mused. "Angus and I met when I was furious with him for taking my parking spot." The interview continued, and somehow, their occasional bickering and the way they naturally played off each other convinced Mrs. Margaret more than any perfectly rehearsed story could have. By the end of the meeting, she handed them the lease with a warm smile. Moving in together proved to be another challenge entirely. Valerie immediately took charge, creating a detailed list of rules and regulations for their cohabitation. She posted it on the refrigerator, much to Steve's amusement. Rule number 1. No parties or large gatherings without prior discussion. Steve read aloud, leaning against the kitchen counter. Rule number 2. Quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Rule number 3. Each person responsible for their own groceries and cooking. These are necessary boundaries, Valerie defended, marking a line down the middle of the refrigerator with masking tape. "This is your side, that's mine." Steve watched her with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "I have just one rule," he said finally. "What's that?" "Don't fall in love with me," he stated with a smirk. Valerie rolled her eyes. "Trust me, that won't be a problem." The first few weeks were a careful dance of avoidance and minimal interaction. They developed their own routines. Valerie would leave early for work, while Steve would set up his home office in the second bedroom. They rarely saw each other, except in passing, which suited them both fine. That is, until the football incident. Valerie had had a particularly exhausting day at work. All she wanted was to come home, heat up the delicious pasta she had prepared that morning, and relax. Instead, she walked into what felt like a sports bar in her living room. Steve sat on the couch with 3 of his friends, all shouting at the TV screen where a football game was playing. Empty beer bottles dotted the coffee table, and the air was thick with the smell of chips and male enthusiasm. "What is this?" she demanded, dropping her bag with a thud. Steve barely glanced her way. "Hey, just watching the game with some friends." "Rule number 1, she reminded him through gritted teeth. "No parties or large gatherings without prior discussion." "This isn't a party," one of his friends, Matthew, chimed in. "Just a few guys watching football." Valerie might have let it slide if she hadn't gone to the kitchen and discovered her empty food container in the sink. She marched back to the living room, container in hand. "Who ate my food?" The guilty looks on their faces told her everything she needed to know. Steve pulled her aside, trying to keep their conversation private. "Look, I'm sorry. Matthew got hungry, and he thought it was mine. We ordered takeout. It should be here soon." But the takeout never arrived, thanks to Matthew's address mix-up, and Valerie's anger reached its boiling point. She turned off the TV mid-play and ordered everyone out, threatening to call Mrs. Margaret if they didn't comply. The next day, the atmosphere in the apartment was arctic. Valerie ignored Steve completely, which bothered him more than he cared to admit. That evening, he went to a restaurant and ordered takeout pasta the exact way Valerie's pasta was. He placed it in the refrigerator with a sticky note. "I'm sorry about yesterday. Here's a replacement, though yours tastes better." When Valerie found the note and the food later that evening, she felt her anger melting away. She found Steve working on his laptop on the balcony and joined him with 2 plates of the pasta. "Just in case it's poisoned," she said, handing him a plate. "We should both risk it." Steve laughed, and something shifted between them. As they ate together, Watching the city lights twinkle below, their conversation flowed naturally for the first time. They discovered shared interests in true crime documentaries and obscure indie bands. Steve admitted that her pasta really was better than the restaurant's, and Valerie confessed that she might have overreacted a bit to the football gathering. From that evening forward, their dynamic changed. The strict rules remained posted on the refrigerator, but they became more of a running joke than actual regulations. Valerie started making extra coffee in the mornings, and Steve began ordering takeout for two without asking. Their careful dance of avoidance transformed into a comfortable routine of shared spaces and casual conversations. Neither would admit it, but their fake marriage was starting to feel less like an arrangement and more like something else entirely. Something that made both of them nervous about breaking that one rule Steve had established: don't fall in love. Sorry to cut in, but I noticed 90% of our viewers watch our stories till the end, but eventually forget to subscribe. Please, if you're enjoying our story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps our stories get recommended to more hearts across the globe. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The early morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their shared apartment, casting long shadows across the kitchen where Valerie stood at the coffee maker. The aroma of freshly ground beans filled the air as she automatically reached for 2 mugs instead of 1, a habit that had formed without her conscious decision. She heard Steve's footsteps coming down the stairs and smiled to herself, knowing he'd timed his morning workout to coincide with her coffee routine. "Morning," Steve said, still slightly breathless from his exercise, his gray t-shirt bearing evidence of his workout. "Is that coffee I smell?" "No, I'm brewing motor oil," Valerie replied with a playful roll of her eyes, sliding his mug across the kitchen island. She'd noticed early on that he liked his coffee black with just a hint of sugar, and she'd been preparing it that way ever since. Their morning routine had evolved naturally over the past few weeks. They'd share coffee, discuss their plans for the day, and sometimes even have breakfast together. Steve had discovered that Valerie made incredible French toast, while she had to admit his protein smoothies were surprisingly good. One particular morning, as Valerie was about to leave for work, she noticed their refrigerator was looking rather empty. "We need groceries," she announced, catching herself using "we" instead of maintaining their usual separate shopping lists. "I can go after work," Steve offered, then added hesitantly, "Want to come with me? We could grab dinner afterward." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment, both of them aware that this would be their first planned outing together that wasn't strictly necessary for maintaining their facade. Valerie found herself nodding before she could overthink it. That evening, they found themselves pushing a cart through the aisles of the same grocery store where they'd had their first hostile encounter. Steve noticed Valerie reaching for something on a high shelf and automatically moved to help her, their bodies close as he reached over her. "See, I can be a gentleman when I want to be," he teased, referring to their first meeting. "My hero," she replied sarcastically, but her smile was genuine. "Though I'm still convinced they make these shelves unnecessarily tall." They fell into an easy rhythm, discussing meal plans and sharing recipes. Steve insisted on buying ingredients for his signature pasta dish, promising to cook for her sometime. Valerie found herself enjoying his company, appreciating how he remembered her preferences and even picked up her favorite snacks without asking. As they walked through the store, other shoppers naturally assumed they were a couple, and neither of them bothered to correct this assumption. They looked the part, trading playful banter, finishing each other's sentences, and moving in sync as they navigated the aisles. It felt comfortable, natural even, in a way that should have alarmed them both. The dinner that followed their shopping trip was at a small Italian restaurant Steve knew. Over plates of handmade pasta and glasses of wine, their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from their childhoods to their career aspirations. Valerie found herself captivated by Steve's passion when he talked about his work in portfolio management, and he was equally impressed by her insights into the tech industry. It was during these moments, the quiet dinners, the shared morning coffees, the domestic routine of grocery shopping, that something began to shift between them. The careful boundaries they'd established started to blur, and the pretense of their arrangement began to feel less like an act and more like a preview of something real. However, their growing comfort with each other was about to be tested by the arrival of new complications in their carefully balanced world. The first ripple came in the form of Bryce Anderson, a senior colleague at Valerie's company. Tall, well-spoken, and undeniably handsome, Bryce had been paying special attention to Valerie since her arrival at the Boston office. One particularly rainy evening, as Valerie was about to call a cab, Bryce appeared beside her desk. "Heading home? Let me give you a ride," he offered with a warm smile. "It's pouring out there." Valerie hesitated for a moment, but the sound of thunder overhead made the decision for her. "That would be great, thank you." During the drive, Bryce proved to be engaging company, making her laugh with stories about office mishaps and sharing his insights about their industry. When he suggested stopping for dinner, Valerie found herself agreeing, hungry, and enjoying his company. Unknown to them, Steve had been watching from their apartment window when Bryce's car pulled up. He observed as Valerie emerged, laughing at something Bryce had said, and felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, that Valerie was free to see whoever she wanted. Their marriage was fake, after all. But the sight of her with another man bothered him more than he cared to admit. When Valerie finally came upstairs, she found Steve on the balcony, unusually absorbed in his laptop. She'd bought some takeout and, following their usual routine, brought out a portion for him. "Hey," she said, setting the food beside him. "Hungry?" "Already ate," he replied curtly, not looking up from his screen. Valerie was taken aback by his cold response. "Everything okay?" "Fine," he said, then added with forced casualness, "Who was that dropping you off?" "Oh, that was Bryce, a colleague," Valerie explained, studying Steve's face. "He offered me a ride because of the rain." Steve merely nodded, still not meeting her eyes, and Valerie felt the warmth of their recent camaraderie cool considerably. The next day, Steve surprised her by showing up at her office at closing time. The security guard approached her desk, saying, "Mrs. Holloway, your husband is waiting for you downstairs." Valerie's heart skipped a beat at the words, "your husband," momentarily forgetting their arrangement. She found Steve leaning against his Mercedes in the parking lot, looking impossibly handsome in his casual business attire. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to hide her pleasure at seeing him. "Thought you might need a ride," he said with a slight smirk, opening the car door for her. As they drove off, he caught sight of Bryce in the rearview mirror, standing by his own car with a disappointed expression. Instead of heading home, Steve took them to an upscale restaurant overlooking the harbor. As they were seated at a romantic corner table, Valerie couldn't help but ask, "What's all this about? Can't a fake husband take his fake wife to dinner?" Steve replied with a playful smile, but there was something in his eyes that suggested more. Their evening was interrupted by the arrival of Vanessa Carter, their neighbor from 2 buildings over. Beautiful, young, and clearly interested in Steve, she approached their table with practiced grace. "Steve, what a coincidence," she exclaimed, though Valerie suspected it was anything but. "Oh, and Valerie, hi." Vanessa had recently begun showing up at their building with increasing frequency, usually when Steve was around. She'd enrolled in his gym and often managed to time her workouts to coincide with his. While Steve was unfailingly polite, Valerie couldn't help but notice how Vanessa's eyes lingered on him, how she found excuses to touch his arm when they talked. "Join us," Valerie offered suddenly, surprising both Steve and herself. She wanted to watch how Steve would react to Vanessa's presence. But Steve smoothly intervened. "Actually, we're celebrating something private tonight. Another time, perhaps, Vanessa." After Vanessa left, a slightly awkward silence fell over their table. Both Steve and Valerie were acutely aware of the growing tension between them, not just from their fake marriage arrangement, but from the real feelings that were developing beneath the surface. The following weeks brought more complications. Bryce began asking Valerie out more frequently, while Vanessa's attempts to get closer to Steve became more obvious. One evening, after Vanessa's car conveniently broke down and Steve gave her a ride home, Valerie couldn't contain her frustration anymore. "You need to be more careful," she said when he returned. "The neighbors might start talking." "Talking about what?" Steve asked, genuinely confused. "About you playing chauffeur to Vanessa like she's your secret girlfriend," Valerie shot back. "We're supposed to be married, remember? What if word gets back to Mrs. Margaret?" "That's rich coming from you," Steve countered. "How do you think it looks when Bryce keeps picking you up for your little dates?" "They're not dates," Valerie protested, though she knew Bryce certainly saw them that way. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like dating." Steve's voice had an edge to it now. "You know what I think? I think you're jealous of Vanessa." "Jealous?" Valerie laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Why would I be jealous?" "You tell me," Steve challenged, stepping closer to her. The air between them crackled with tension. "Well, if anyone's jealous here, it's you," Valerie retorted. "You've been acting strange ever since Bryce started giving me rides home." To her surprise, Steve didn't deny it. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair in frustration and said, "Maybe I am jealous. Maybe I don't like seeing you with him, because somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like pretend to me." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Valerie's heart raced as she processed what he was saying. "What are you saying, Steve?" "I'm saying that I broke my own rule," he admitted quietly. "The one about not falling in love. And watching you with Bryce, seeing you smile at him the way you used to smile at me, it's driving me crazy." Valerie stood frozen, her own carefully guarded feelings threatening to spill over. "You told me not to fall for you," she whispered. "You made it a rule." "I know," Steve said, moving closer still. "I was trying to protect myself, but I didn't expect you to be you. I didn't expect to wake up every morning looking forward to our coffee time, or to miss you when you're at work, or to feel like punching Bryce every time he looks at you. That's not very professional of you," Valerie tried to joke, but her voice trembled slightly. "I don't care about being professional anymore," Steve said, his eyes intense as they held her gaze. "I care about you, and I think you care about me too." Valerie's heart thundered in her chest as she stood mere inches from Steve, his confession hanging in the air between them. The city lights twinkled through their floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a soft glow across his features. His gray eyes held such intensity that she found it hard to maintain eye contact, yet impossible to look away. "You care about me?" she repeated softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too intimate, the air charged with unspoken emotions. Steve reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted. "This whole arrangement. It started as just a convenient solution, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. The morning coffees, the grocery shopping, even our silly arguments about the refrigerator space, I found myself looking forward to all of it." Valerie leaned slightly into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I tried so hard not to fall for you," she confessed. "I kept reminding myself it was all pretend, that your one rule was not to fall in love. But every morning when I made that extra cup of coffee, every time you remembered my favorite snacks at the grocery store, every time you smiled at me across the dinner table, I fell a little more." Steve's thumb traced a gentle path along her cheekbone. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Why didn't you?" she countered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "Fear," he admitted honestly. "Fear of ruining what we had. Fear of making things awkward since we have to live together. Fear that you might not feel the same way. Then Bryce came along, and seeing you with him." "Is that why you started showing up at my office?" Valerie asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "Maybe," Steve grinned sheepishly. "I couldn't stand the thought of him driving you home, taking you to dinner, making you laugh. I wanted to be the one doing all those things." "You already were," Valerie pointed out. "All those evening drives, our impromptu dinner dates, our conversations on the balcony, those moments meant more to me than any time spent with Bryce." Steve's other hand found its way to her waist, drawing her closer. "And Vanessa? Don't even get me started on Vanessa." Valerie rolled her eyes, but there was no real anger in her voice. "Every time she showed up at our door with some flimsy excuse to see you, every time she, coincidentally, appeared at your gym." "Were you jealous?" Steve asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Terribly," Valerie admitted. "I hated how she looked at you, how she always found reasons to touch your arm when she talked to you. I kept thinking about how perfect she'd look next to you. Tall, elegant, obviously interested." "But not you," Steve interrupted. "She's not you, Valerie. She doesn't challenge me the way you do, doesn't make me laugh the way you do. She doesn't know how I like my coffee, or that I can't sleep without reading for at least 30 minutes. She doesn't make my heart race every time she walks into a room." The sincerity in his voice made Valerie's breath catch. Here they were, standing in their shared apartment, the place where their elaborate charade had begun, finally being honest with each other. The irony wasn't lost on her. They'd started with a fake marriage and ended up falling genuinely in love. "So what happens now?" she asked, her hands resting on his chest, feeling his heartbeat through his shirt. Instead of answering with words, Steve lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But when Valerie responded, sliding her hands up to his shoulders and pulling him closer, the kiss deepened. All their pent-up feelings, all the longing glances and suppressed emotions poured into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Steve rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "Not because we're pretending to be married, not because it's convenient, but because somewhere between our morning coffees and evening talks, between our grocery shopping trips and takeout dinners, I fell completely, irrevocably in love with you." Tears pricked at Valerie's eyes as she smiled up at him. "I love you too," she said, "even when you steal my food and invite your friends over without warning." Steve laughed, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I promise to always replace any food I steal," he murmured into her hair, "and to give proper notice before any football gatherings." The next morning, they woke up in Steve's room, Valerie curled against his side, his arm wrapped protectively around her. The early morning sun painted the room in soft golden hues, and for the first time, their domestic routine felt completely natural, without any pretense. As they shared their morning coffee on the balcony, they discussed how to handle their changing relationship. The first order of business was dealing with Bryce and Vanessa. "I'll talk to Bryce today," Valerie said, sipping her coffee. "He needs to know that I'm not just unavailable, but that I'm genuinely in love with my husband." Steve's face lit up at her words. "Your husband, huh?" "Well, technically you are," she reminded him with a grin. "Even if it started as a fake arrangement." "About that," Steve said, setting down his coffee cup. "Maybe we should think about making it real." Valerie nearly choked on her coffee. "Are you proposing?" "Not yet," Steve smiled, taking her hand. "But I want you to know that's where I see this going. I want to do it right, take you on proper dates, court you the way you deserve, then propose when the time is right. No fake marriage certificates, no staged photos, just us, being real." Valerie squeezed his hand, her heart full. "I'd like that." True to her word, Valerie spoke with Bryce that day at work. He took the news surprisingly well, admitting he had suspected there was something real between her and Steve from the few times he'd seen them together. Steve, meanwhile, made it clear to Vanessa that he was completely committed to his wife. The next time she showed up at their door with another flimsy excuse, she found them cooking dinner together in the kitchen, looking every bit the happy couple they now truly were. The following months were filled with real dates, genuine moments, and deepening love. They went on actual dinner dates where Steve would pick her up from work, not out of jealousy but because he wanted to spend every possible moment with her. They hosted dinner parties where they didn't have to pretend to be in love because they actually were. Mrs. Margaret, who lived a few houses down, often saw them together and would smile knowingly. Something about their dynamic had always reminded her of her own love story with Angus, and she took pride in having helped bring them together, even if unknowingly. 6 months after their first real kiss, Steve planned a special evening. He decorated their balcony with fairy lights and candles, recreating the atmosphere of the night they first admitted their feelings. As they stood there, the city lights twinkling below them, Steve got down on one knee. "Valerie Davis," he began, pulling out a velvet box. "When we first met in that grocery store, I was an arrogant jerk who wouldn't help you reach a jar of honey. When we agreed to this fake marriage arrangement, I thought it would be just that, fake. But life has a funny way of surprising us. Every morning when I wake up next to you, every time I see you smile, every moment we spend together, I fall more in love with you. We started with a fake marriage, but I want to spend the rest of my life in a real one with you. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Tears streaming down her face, Valerie nodded. "Yes," she managed to say through her tears. 1,000 times yes." The ring Steve slipped onto her finger was nothing like the costume jewelry they'd used for their fake wedding photos. It was a beautiful vintage piece, an elegant diamond set in white gold. Their real wedding, held 6 months later, was everything their fake one wasn't. Instead of staged photos in a studio, they had genuine moments captured throughout their special day. Their vows weren't rehearsed lines to convince a landlord. They were heartfelt promises to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. Mrs. Margaret attended as a special guest, beaming with pride as she watched the couple she'd unknowingly helped bring together. During the reception, she pulled them aside and confessed that she had known their initial marriage was fake. "The marriage certificate might have fooled others," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "But I've been around long enough to know real love when I see it. What I saw in you two that day wasn't the polished performance of a fake couple. It was the potential for real love. I saw how you looked at each other when you thought no one was watching, how you naturally gravitated toward each other. I took a chance on you both, and I'm so glad I did." Valerie and Steve exchanged surprised looks before breaking into laughter. All this time, they thought they had fooled Mrs. Margaret, when in reality, she had seen through their charade but recognized something deeper. Their honeymoon, their real honeymoon, was spent in Paris, where they recreated the fake honeymoon photo they'd taken in front of a green screen all those months ago. But this time, when they kissed in front of the Eiffel Tower, it wasn't for show. It was a genuine expression of their love, a love that had grown from the most unexpected of arrangements. Back home, they continued living in the apartment where their story began, but now their marriage was real in every sense. Their morning coffee routine remained, but now it was accompanied by genuine kisses and loving glances. Their shared grocery shopping trips became one of their favorite weekly activities, and Steve never failed to help Valerie reach items on the top shelf, always with a playful reminder of their first meeting. The rules posted on their refrigerator stayed up, now serving as an amusing reminder of how far they'd come. But Steve's rule about not falling in love had been ceremoniously crossed out and replaced with a new one: fall in love every day. Years later, Steve and Valerie would often sit on their balcony, just as they had done countless times before, and marvel at how their elaborate charade had transformed into the most authentic thing in their lives. Their fake marriage had given them a real love story, one that proved that sometimes the best things in life start with a little pretense but end with absolute truth. Their love story became a testament to the fact that while you can fake a marriage certificate, you can't fake the way your heart skips a beat when the right person walks into the room, or how your day feels brighter just because they're in it. Steve and Valerie had started with a lie but ended up with the most beautiful truth, that love finds its way, even in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the best relationships are the ones that begin with, Don't Fall in Love, and end with, I can't help but love you more each day.